The Tartini project is it's ended up in a fantastic tool for musicians to actually see what they're doing instead of just feel and instead of just hear. In terms of intonation, we can now see exactly where the note is, whether that's what we wanted or whether we want to adjust it and change it. It's a decision we can learn, something we can learn from that and decide to do differently possibly.
Well, basically, intonation is a prime concern for string players. So when we're playing, I know when you're singing, you can only actually hear 70% of what you actually sing, but I don't know what percentage it is for the violin as such, but I know that when I'm playing, I wouldn't actually be able to hear as much as maybe you would be able to hear, because I know it's just somewhat distorted. And because your mind's playing, like going through other things about like the dynamics and like what the next note is, you're not actually fully concentrating on intonation. So just to bring another like sense into it, it's quite good to actually be able to see it. Like you think you're in tune, but then you actually just that slight bit up or like slight bit sharp or flat. So that's kind of, yeah, it's giving you a more accurate description of exactly where the intonation is when you're playing a scale or something like that. And there's also the vibrato aspect of it as well, which we were using, which was very handy because like often you'll just be vibrating, but you wouldn't actually know how consistent it is, and just seeing that wave is just a really good indication of how you're going with it.
Of course, the most interesting thing is when you yourself as a player and you develop your skill, you've developed the way you play in terms of how it feels, in terms of how it sounds, and for the first time you see how it looks as far as the pitch. It can be very rewarding, it can be very enlightening, certainly in both ways. When I find it to be enlightening, I find it to be enlightening because my decisions I've made may be subconscious. They may be decisions I've made for an artistic reason. And to see them in front of me is fascinating. It makes me question then at that point, was that a mistake or was that a subconscious process? You see a student coming in week to week, and in addition to their technical training and their technical development, you watch their musical development, but Tartini's working on their aural skills, their aural awareness. A student practicing is able to perfect what they do only to the level of the ability of their aural awareness. Then they come into the lesson, the teacher comments on that. The student feels they're doing perfectly, but the teacher feels otherwise. The teacher then brings their awareness to something new. Tartini enables them to actually see, maybe from a teacher's perspective or somebody who has a higher awareness or higher ability orally. And through that self-learning process, they can actually make more progress in a week, from week-to-week lessons.
Probably to say that even though to me the scale pretty much sounded in tune, I knew it wasn't ever going to be perfect, but it was quite good to see that you're actually consistently sharp or flat on certain notes. So to see that, just to have it documented, you could actually go back and be like, okay, so it's definitely that note there, and you could fix it. Yeah.
Well, I could see the way I changed the note. If I kind of put a finger wrong down to start with, then I'd change it almost subconsciously to get at least close to the right note. I could also see the way my vibrato had kind of wee bits that weren't quite the same, and little, not really mistakes, but slight blemishes. And then also this thing with the amplitude for each note was so precise, you can see it's quite hard to hear when you're just playing it, but watching it on the screen, I would imagine that if you worked on that, you could really improve your playing in that respect.
I think it is useful, just so you know what your ear's thinking. I mean, if you're hearing it in tune and then you realise it's actually a little bit flat or a little bit sharp, that's really good to know, because then you know that there's something wrong with your ears and not with how you're playing it. Yeah.
You know, pitch is such an interesting thing. It becomes in an instrument, it's not an issue with an instrument, say like piano, but an instrument, say like violin, where you are in control of your pitch that you're playing. Once you get beyond is it in tune or out of tune decision making, you get into an artistic level of pitching. For instance, expressive intonation, and you want certain intervals higher or lower because it affects the expressive qualities of what you're doing, therefore the artistic outcome. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing about Tartini. Yes, it can be used for a developmental tool, orally, in training students to hear, training players to hear. But it's at the artistic end where you can actually now see a qualitative assessment of exactly what you've done in an artistic sense.
As a string player, one of the biggest challenges is playing in tune. And any device that can help that is useful. It's especially helpful on cello when you're in high positions where note intervals are very, very close. And even the most minuscule adjustment in your hand can be quite a large adjustment orally.
One of the areas that the designers and I are very aware of is that we never set out with Tartini to replace the need for students to develop their oral skills. Tartini is the third sense. It's an addition. I would hate to see myself or any students use it instead of developing their oral skills. Yes, to help maybe speed up their development orally.